Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game, with me, Kevin Day, and him, Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, I have to ask you this, it's questions day. We've occasionally delayed the start of this show for various reasons, like the Women's World Cup final, for example, just a couple of weeks ago, but we're not kicking this off until just about 7:10 on a Sunday evening for another of your culinary experiments, Kieran. Explain to the people out there why we're late.
Yes, I was busy making a peach salsa to go along with the baba ganoush with the Korean beer chicken, which I'd made. I like cooking. You're a creative artist. I'm the antithesis of that. I just add up numbers, so I love to be creative in the kitchen.
You've gone full fusion, though, there, haven't you? Korean chicken, baba ganoush.
Well, because Brighton are playing in the Europa League, I got to get used to a bit of more international cuisine. I feel.
I wonder where you can watch those games, Kieran, on TV. And congratulations to all of you listening at home who said "bless you" when I said baba ganoush. That's the correct thing to do. My culinary day was less exciting than yours, Kieran. Whoever thought that drinking pints of Guinness in 95-degree heat was a good idea is... I know, Kieran, let's face it as well. Let's have a quick look at the league table with Man United having just lost. You're in 6th, we're in 7th. I don't think there's ever been a time when we've both been in the European positions, not even the day before kick-off alphabetically. This is all quite exciting, isn't it?
Absolutely wonderful, yes, yeah. And good result for your guys today, so well done.
First half was one of the dullest first halves of football. Even in the second half, only Palace could make a 5-goal thriller slightly dull. But good draws for you. I mean, you got the dream draw, Kieran. You got Amsterdam. Basically, that's what you wanted, wasn't it?
Yes. I'm going with a severe warning from the Baroness already.
Okay, let's get on with some questions. We've got some crackers as always, and our first one comes from Mark Collins. And Mark Collins is voicing what I think a lot of fans say, that even though we've got one of the most amazing sets of stadia in the Premier League in this country, Mark gets really frustrated at matches because he can't get online at half time. I was wondering how much it would cost a club with, say, a 30,000-seater stadium to provide good Wi-Fi connection for all fans, and if the commercial benefits of being able to directly market to the fans would offset the cost. Although perhaps Wi-Fi will be obsolete before you get around to answering this question. Always, I love the little stiletto at the end, right? The little rapier, little sucker punch with a sharp object. Well done.
That's definitely in the harsh but fair category there, Mark. I spoke to my friend, the Skunk, who works for one of the internet companies, and he said,
I dread to think what sort of internet company he works for, if that's what it's called.
Yes, and he said it's simply a problem is that the technology just isn't quite there as yet. They're fully aware that fans are all piling onto the internet at the same time, and the strength of the routers, especially given that it is an outdoor environment, simply can't cope with 30, 40, 50, 60,000 people all trying to access simultaneously. The technology will get there because from the point of the clubs, they're losing out on marketing opportunities. Whoever's sponsoring the match, who wants to go direct to consumer, will be missing out on opportunities. Clubs are trying to get more savvy. If you score a winning goal 10 minutes from time, it would make a very good sort of commercial proposition for the club to be able to send a quick text to everybody there. If you buy the players, if you buy the shirt with the player's name who's just scored that goal, we'll give you a 10% discount before 7 p.m. tonight, whoever it's going to be. So I think the clubs are keen. There's certainly the data companies are keen, but the technology is not quite there yet. And anybody that's ever travelled by train or other modes of transport will be able to confirm that. We pay a lot of money. We pay premium rates for internet coverage, but I think it could be argued you don't get a premium product in return.
Well, they need to sort out technology in other areas, Kieran, as well, because we've seen already this season at Arsenal. We saw it at Palace last year, where kickoffs were delayed because
Mm.
whatever it is technology-wise that's getting people in with paperless tickets just crashed. So, but as you say, it shouldn't be too much to ask in this day and age. I mean, I can understand it at somewhere like Selhurst Park because the Arthur Wait where we are isn't fit for purpose, full stop. But it's got really thick, broad walls. It was made in the '60s. It's pretty much concrete, so you can sort of get that. But when you go to a new stadium, you expect as a matter of, I mean, really today, Kieran, everybody was trying to stream a film halfway through the first half rather than watch what was being played out in front of us. We were desperate to, so we need help. Our next question, Kieran, comes from Mexico. It's a long time since we've had a question from Mexico, and it comes from Randy Eschelman. And Randy says, "Saludos from Mexico. I was wondering about broadcast rights," says Randy. "The Premier League sold broadcast rights in what they call LATAM, the Latin American companies of Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, Nicaragua, and Panama, to a streaming-only provider, Paramount Plus Latin America. Internet access across these 7 countries averages out to only around 65%, and therefore excludes some 63 million viewers in these football-mad countries. Also, for those of us with the internet, it's often too slow for reliable live streaming. As broadcast rights go, is there a metric that the EPL uses to evaluate the size of the check received for a streaming-only broadcaster versus potential loss of / inability to reach X number of viewers? And do the on-field advertisers have to be made aware of any differences in subscribers?" So it's not just here we're having internet connection problems.
Right. Well, first of all, thanks for getting in contact, Randy, all the way from Mexico. We didn't know we had listeners there, so yeah, I'm thoroughly chuffed. As far as the Premier League is concerned, all that matters is the size of the check. Especially for a market which it would not be probably in the top 4 or 5. If you take a look at the US market, if you take a look at the Scandinavian market, they're all huge. Some of the Asian markets as well. So unfortunately, the Premier League is going to focus, and you can understand it from its point of view, because ultimately the Premier League is a members club, and the members will be saying, we want the rates of rights to go up on an annual basis as best we can, and therefore it would have simply taken the highest bidder. I can understand the annoyance of people who can't access. I suspect what will happen is that the likes of Paramount Plus Latin America will say, well, we do make our product available to to bars, to restaurants, and so on, so people can congregate and watch Premier League. And as far as the advertisers are concerned, again, I think if you actually work out the numbers, I was talking to our friend, the secret broadcaster, earlier today on a different topic, and he said that the subscription channels only make around about 10% of their overall income from adverts. So given that I suspect the Premier League is not necessarily the biggest product as far as the Latin American market is concerned, because they've got very dedicated domestic football followings, it's not a huge check to begin with, and therefore the loss of eyeballs in terms of advertisers would not be significant.
I do wish you wouldn't use that expression, Kieran, the loss of eyeballs. It sends a little shudder down. So it's are you telling me, Kieran, that our secret broadcaster, who's been very good to us,
Mm-hmm.
is perhaps slightly lacking in knowledge of Guatemala and Honduras in terms of their broadcasting rights? He's simply a home nations boy, is he?
No. He's a man of many countries. In fact, he was travelling today, but he was decent enough to get in contact with me when I sent out it with the equivalent of the Gotham City big torch to Batman.
Yeah, you see, remember our conversation last week about me not being able to keep a secret?
Yes.
If that was me saying that, I'd say, in fact, he was travelling today. He left on the 7:45 from Station X. He then said people would very easily be able to track him down. But I'm being more discreet, Kieran. Daniel Robertson has our next question, and it's a scenario I quite like, actually. So Daniel Robertson says, I read that FIFA compensated clubs around $10,000 for every day that their player was involved in the Men's World Cup. if this is true, is there a scenario where some clubs are actually making a profit on players who are involved in the World Cup, i.e. if their wages are lower than $70,000 a week?
That's right. It's a flat fee as far as FIFA are concerned. It's a flat compensatory fee, and it also started before the World Cup. Well, before the World Cup commenced itself, because teams were being put together in the squads and they were playing some sort of pre-tournament friendlies and so on. So I think the payment actually started around about 1 to 2 weeks before the competition, and then it went on through the competition. So there are clubs as low as League Two who had players who were participating in the FIFA World Cup. I know when I last spoke to one of the clubs in League Two about this issue, they were still quite miffed, because although FIFA are obliged to pay them, they've not got round, certainly hadn't got round when I last spoke to them, they hadn't got round to physically paying the money that was due, given that the World Cup took place in November 2022. That does seem to be quite a poor show. So I'm hoping that they will have speeded up the processes by then, or by now.
Our next question, Kieran, comes from James Poulin, or perhaps Poulin, who knows? Let's go for Poulin. Although actually, no, let's go for Poulin, because it's about European finals. James says, my question is about European finals, which I've just revealed. How much does the club, city or country who hosts the final pay for the right to do so?
Right. For this, I went on to the london.gov.uk website, which on the sunniest Sunday of the year, it probably isn't a very sensible thing to do, but it didn't stop me. And London, or Wembley, did bid to host the 2023 Champions League final. Clearly, it went elsewhere in the end. And it surprised me that the cost of hosting, as far as the Greater London Authority was concerned, was £5.6 million, which is a considerable amount of money, and that's effectively just to get the benefit. And then we had this long conversation with Mark Roberts in our most recent episode, and there would be additional security costs. There would be additional other hosting costs to be incurred by Wembley Stadium itself. So this figure of 5.6 million is just the cost to the council. Having said that, when the Champions League took place in Cardiff, which I think was in 2018, they did an assessment post the tournament or post the final, and they estimated that the benefit to Cardiff in terms of additional hospitality generation, increased profile, the vox pops that were coming in, and so on, was somewhere in the region of 45 million. So it does pay for itself. And I think it pays for itself if you do it once every few years. If you were to have it taking place at the same venue every year, I think you could end up in a similar scenario to what we've seen in Eurovision, when you and I both remember when Ireland seemed to win it practically every year. And the Irish government quickly realised it was costing them a fortune to host all of these different countries. Clearly, it was there was far more people arriving who were affiliated with the event because it covers so many countries. So the Irish government was saying, we'll have to go and put Jedward on with a song to make sure that we don't win it, because we can't afford to repeat the success.
Well, there is a parallel with Eurovision here, though, Kieran, isn't there? Because what happens in European football is it does tend to be those cities that have a tourist industry already, or an infrastructure already, or always somewhere like Cardiff that already has the large venues and the hotels. It's places like Latvia that will never get a Champions League final, or probably a Europa League final, and it's places like Tallinn or Riga. Tallinn being a completely different capital, but Riga, for example, are the sort of places that would benefit more from getting the occasional final, wouldn't they?
But they would, but I think you have to do sort of a cost-benefit analysis. We saw West Ham get to the final and win the Europa Conference last season, but the stadium wasn't very big, and I think a lot of West Ham fans were a bit peeved that they missed out on the opportunity to see. That's the first sort of international tournament that West Ham have won since winning the World Cup in 1966, as far as their fan base are concerned.
Yeah, I never did understand why that statue outside Upton Park of the West Ham World Cup winners also had a Fulham player in it. It's a nice statue, though. Now, our next question, Kieran, puts me and us in a bit of a quandary, really, because it's clearly a long time since this question was asked, and clearly what the question is about has happened and is probably going to stop happening quite soon. But I think it's a fair question. And also, I like to give encouragement to those of our listeners who have been on the waiting list longer. There are people on the NHS who are getting operations quicker than we're asking some of these questions, Kieran, let's be fair. So I think it's only fair to ask this question. And I'm going to ask it as it was asked, because otherwise we'll get into a complete nightmare of different tenses, past, future, present. So I'm going to ask it as though this was when Paul Glover, when it was fresh off the email from Paul Glover, way back when. And Paul Glover says, since last year's Men's World Cup and the long periods of injury time, there's been talk about whether the approach taken during the World Cup would be used in domestic football, and it would seem that this hasn't happened yet. It may be cynical of me to think that this may be a factor in this, but do you think there's a financial aspect, and more specifically pressure from broadcasters? My thinking is that broadcasters know that in a live show they can expect a certain amount of airtime for advertising, and that by more of that pesky football being played and taking up potential money-making airtime, then broadcasters stand to lose out on advertising revenue. Now, those who are inclined to conspiracy theories, Kieran, might already say that Paul's absolutely right, because we've seen it happen this season. The first 2 weeks of the season, we were seeing 8, 9, 10 minutes added on to the first half and to the end of the game. It's not something that's ever completely bothered me, I have to say, but we were seeing up to 15, 16 minutes in the first couple of weeks. That's already down considerably. I think we had 3 minutes for half time and 6 or 7 at the end of the game today. I know the Arsenal one was quite long, but a lot of stuff had gone on. So we've already seen it. And there are already people saying, well, that's the broadcasters are saying to the referees, you're using up way too much of our advertising time. Or is that as cynical as Paul Glover suggests in his question?
I don't think that there is a conspiracy theory here. I think
No.
what we are seeing
No.
is that the players are adapting.
Okay.
And we're therefore seeing less time wasting. And we're seeing less. You don't see the players when a free kick is given to the opposition. The first thing they tend to do is either throw the ball away or they stand in front of the ball, because that's effectively going to be an instant yellow card under the sort of the guidance introduced by Howard Webb. So a combination of the players realizing that the initial reaction of referees was that they were going to apply this policy has actually resulted in more football being played. But I think the belief that the broadcasters are going to kick up a fuss, it depends upon who the broadcaster is. And again, we've already mentioned that we've had a chat with our friend, the secret broadcaster, and it was in fact in relation to this particular question. And his reply was, as far as the satellite broadcasters are concerned, they're actually quite relaxed because they've got a 2.5 to 3 hour show, and actually having more football time, as it were, just simply means that they'll have slightly less punditry. And what you tend to see is that the viewing figures do drop off at the end of the game. So actually, it's Sky and TNT and so on. They'll be more than happy for the matches. And also because the broadcasters are only getting a small fraction of their revenue, the subscription broadcasters are only getting a small fraction, around about 10% of their overall income coming from the adverts, it doesn't really affect them so much. What's of greater concern is the free-to-air broadcasters. The BBC doesn't like to shift the 10 o'clock news. It will do, and we always, we get the very grave voice tending to be coming from the commentator to say something along those lines. But ITV, I think, are the biggest potential losers here. And of course, we now have Channel 4 showing some of the England matches in the Nations League and so on. So the reason for that is that they tend to sell advertising slots for specific hours. And if the football match runs on, that means that they might not be able to get the maximum amounts. And also, if you think about it from the perspective of the free-to-air broadcasters, a company such as ITV is far more reliant upon advertising income. And normally, I think we're now down as far as the terrestrial commercial stations are concerned. We're now down to around about 40 to 41 minutes per hour of actual broadcast TV, and the rest is adverts. If you've got a football match where the first half and the second half are going to be going on for 50, 55 minutes, can you see from the broadcaster's point of view, they feel that they will be squeezed. Now, if it's the World Cup, then you have to suck it and see, because you'd be claiming pretty big rates anyway, especially if it's England or the home nations or a big match. So they don't like it. The broadcasters, the free-to-air broadcasters, the satellite broadcasters, they're far more relaxed about it because it's more football. And if it delivers the level of excitement that we saw at the end of the Arsenal versus Manchester United match today, then it's great for them, because it creates a noise in its own rights as far as social media is concerned, and that can only benefit as Sky or TNT when they are putting out their clips on YouTube and Twitter and so on.
It's interesting, Kieran, because a BBC hour is already 10 minutes longer than an ITV hour. An ITV hour is 48 minutes of TV. On the BBC, it's 58 minutes. So like you say, when ITV have got games, they are being squeezed. I'd be interested if you could ask our friend, the secret broadcaster. It's really difficult for me not to say his name. I'm being very good here, Kieran. If you could ask our friend, the secret broadcaster, whether or how much research has been done into... We know that people tend to watch big games if they're on both ITV and BBC, especially England games, at the same time, World Cup finals, etc., semi-finals. People tend to watch BBC rather than ITV. The figures are always slightly higher. And I wonder whether they know how many of those people are watching because they don't like the ad break immediately after the final whistle goes at half time and at the end of the game. So I'd be interested to see what you had to say about that, Kieran. I like our next question, Kieran, because it comes from that very big country we talked about last week. And I did say Australia was big. There was no part of me that said it wasn't big. I didn't really think I deserved some of the teasing I got about my geographical knowledge there. But it's also given me an excuse to do some historical research, which I always like, some of which I knew anyway. But it comes from Liam Kavanagh. And Liam says, in Australia last year, we saw the first Christmas Day game of any sport in the National Basketball League. It's been seen as a great success, with the broadcast numbers being the highest yet for the entire competition this season. Already, the T20 Cricket League, the Big Bash League, is talking about getting in on these broadcast rights and running their own Christmas Day fixture. Although it's probably very unlikely the Australian A-League will follow suit, they have many other of their own issues without adding this debate to the mix. The USA has done this for quite a while in both basketball and gridiron. How long do you think, if ever, it will take the Premier League, or in the absence of the Premier League, the EFL or any other football taking advantage of the dead air of Christmas Day and start playing games on Christmas Day? It's only the last game, I think it was 1965, Kieran. We used to play, in fact, during the 50s, there used to be a Christmas Day, Boxing Day doubleheader. So you would play, I think famously, Charlton played Sunderland on Christmas Day and then travelled to Sunderland on Boxing Day. Of course, even more famously, Kieran, you all know this, and this is one of the reasons I really like this question. Brighton lost 18-0 to Norwich on Christmas Day in 1940. There was a war going on, so that was an excuse. And Brighton did only turn up with 5 players, and the rest of the team was made up of Norwich fans. But still, I get the opportunity to say you lost 18-0, Kieran, to Norwich on 1940. Brentford tried to revive it early in the 80s when they had a game against Wimbledon. Unfortunately, it didn't go down well because the chairman of Brentford tried to sell it as a favour to women, which basically went, women, you'll be too busy in the kitchen. You don't want men under your feet. How about we play Brentford against Wimbledon on Christmas Day? And it didn't go down very well. So there is a long tradition for about a century. Games were played on Christmas Day for a long time, Kieran. There was no TV, or there was only one channel. So Christmas Day was a very good time for people. There were far fewer public holidays in the late 19th century, early 20th century. So why not spend one playing football? I suggest that it's unlikely that we will ever return to Christmas Day football, Kieran, but why not?
Well, I'll be too busy making peach salsa, I would imagine.
Not on Christmas Day, Kieran. Not unless global warming's getting even worse than we thought it was.
Goes very well with turkey, peach salsa, Kevin.
Does it?
Yeah, well, yeah. You should try it.
I'm not. I'm telling you now, Kieran. I'm not trying it. My foot's going down. You'll be telling me you stuff it with turkey and peach salsa.
Oh, yeah, good combo. Combo.
Our friend in Mexico may well like the idea of that combo, though. You'll be putting chocolate sauce on it next, Kieran. Good Lord.
Absolutely. So back to the question, and actually, again, this ties in with our interview with Mark Roberts. If you're going to have football matches on Christmas Day, then you're going to need security. You're going to need policing on Christmas Day. So, I think police officers are entitled to not have to be called in on an overtime. You've then got issues of transport. You've then got the issues of the football clubs themselves, because they're going to have to get their staff in. And we know historically, as far as Boxing Day matches are concerned, they'll often will be, the first match will often take place at midday. I can remember one Boxing Day actually seeing two football matches in a single day in London. I went to see Brighton lose at Chelsea, and then went to see. I went up to Highbury to see Arsenal play Southampton. So it can be done as far as the facilities are concerned. But for me, and I'm not being critical of Liam here. He's used this phrase, "the dead air of Christmas Day." Well, Christmas Day should be for families, and football now dominates the cricket season. Football now dominates rugby. Football now dominates every other sport, and perhaps actually having 24 hours off from football is good for us. The broadcasters, they've got families, so who wants to do the punditry on Christmas Day? And Gary Neville and Jamie Carragher and everybody else for both TNT and Sky, they're entitled to spend a little bit of time with their family as well. And the players, historically, what has been the case is quite often, if the players aren't travelling if the next fixture isn't too far, the players get the opportunity to spend time with their families. Yes, they'll go in for light training on Christmas Day and then spend a few hours with the partners and the kids and the parents and so on. So can it be done? Yes. Is there evidence that you'd get a big spike in viewers? And ultimately, I think this would be the ultimate driver. I can only presume that the Premier League and TNT and Sky have done their estimates of the level of interest, and they probably said, we don't think there's enough to warrant it. And do you really want to be getting up at 7 o'clock on Christmas Day morning to travel to a football club? Because we should be opening our presents with
exactly.
friends and family and loved ones.
I'll tell you who would do it, Kieran. Martin Keown. He'd do it. He'd do Christmas Day. He'd volunteer for TNT and for BBC. Yeah, I'll do both. There is something though, Kieran, about. I mean, the Boxing Day game is special, isn't it? I don't think anybody would want to mess with that. I mean, I imagine knowing how you are with the fixture computer. I imagine you're at home every year on Boxing Day. I imagine to a team in the bottom three of the table as well. I'm guessing we very rarely are, but there is something about that. I wouldn't want football on Christmas Day. Boxing Day is perfect.
Yes, yeah, good recovery day.
Martin Avery, he said good recovery day like with elite athletes there, Kieran. The amount of peach salsa I had yesterday. It's also the best day to take your book that you've got for Christmas into the toilet, Boxing Day, isn't it? You've got an excuse to be in there for 40 minutes, which is something you can all do with a book that's coming out very soon, everybody. Martin Avery has our next question. And Martin has some questions around player data that he's hoping we can shed some light on. How much do clubs spend on player data gathering? For example, a Premier League club like Liverpool, renowned for being big on data analysis, to a Championship club like Bristol City. Martin says, I'm a Bristol City fan. Or a League Two club like Leyton Orient. Is it possible to separate this kind of expenditure from clubs' financial records?
Right. As far as the vast majority of clubs are concerned, there is no detail with regards to the amount that they will be giving to the likes of Opta and the other scouting organisations. A club such as Liverpool will have an internal data analytical team. Manchester City recruited somebody from Harvard University with a PhD in astrophysics to do their calculations for them. So these are, I'm nerdy. I'll be the first to admit that, and I love a spreadsheet, as you know. But these are mathematical geniuses that are crunching the data. So you will have the internal costs, and then you will have the external costs. Now, I suspect for a club outside of the Premier League, they're going to be mainly using the benefit of the data organisations who will sell the information. And I think you've got to be a little bit careful about how you use it. It's a bit like if somebody gives me a piano, it doesn't make me a piano player. So it's exactly the same with data. I can produce a balance sheet and I can give it to somebody, but I say, well, thanks very much. It doesn't mean anything to me. So it's having people who understand the numbers, which is absolutely critical as well. Some clubs don't want to go down that route. The manager might put up resistance because the manager wants to be independent of the rest of the club when it comes to talent recruitment and retention. He says, I like this type of player. This is how we're going to play, and I don't want the club interfering. And that psyche still exists to a degree, but it's disappearing. The only club which I know does give out some information is Brighton, because Tony Bloom, who is the club owner, he's famous for his Star Lizard organisation, which is, nobody quite knows what it does, but it's some form of advisory consultancy when it comes to the predictions of the outcomes of sporting events. And I think that goes down on a granular level to individual players. So I had a look in the small print, and if you've got an owner who is involved in these organisations, they are what is known as a related party. So therefore, you have to show the transactions. So Brighton paid £3 million in 21-22 to Star Lizard. I suspect the football club probably feels they got value for money with regards to that. But it does show that we are talking at Premier League level. Certainly, millions will be spent on this particular area, because that's the difference between recruiting a £100 million success and £100 million dud. And from the club's point of view, it wants to protect its the value of its inventory.
It pains me to say this, Kieran, but clearly Brighton, whatever they're doing something right when it comes to data analysis of players that they're recruiting. I think it's interesting. One of the biggest changes, if you look at the Premier League regulations now, ground regulations compared to 10 years ago, and this is probably something that cost Luton a bit of money in the 2-week delay they had bringing their stadium up to Premier League scratch, is that you now have to provide quite a large number of space for the data analysis team from the away team, which certainly 15 years ago, that wouldn't have been a consideration. So along with all the media seats and TV seats, etc., you have to provide the space, and also you have to provide the correct level of internet and hard wiring so they can do their job undisturbed. While you and I are trying to get on to see how much peach we should put in our salsa at half-time, Kieran, these people are doing so. And you can only see it expanding as well, can't you, in terms of football in future? Because I know one or two clubs are against it and still like the idea of old-fashioned scouts and people like Ray Lewington running his eye over someone. But in 5 years' time, you're going to be left behind if you're not doing this sort of thing, Kieran, aren't you?
Yes, I think you should always view data as a complement rather than a substitute for whatever you're doing. But even when it comes down to traditional business, if you take a look at even a company such as Apple, why were they a success, and the likes of Scion and the other people who were developing the smartphones not a success? It came down not just to doing the data, doing the technology, but also having people there who could look at a product or look at a service in terms of the design and so on.
Penultimate question, Kieran. is a fascinating one, actually, because it appertains to something that we talk about on a very regular basis, and something that we assume all our listeners around the world, both existing and new, will understand without us having to explain what it is. And it's clear that there are people who still don't fully understand what it is, and I'm pleased because I don't, to be perfectly honest. I pretend that I do. But Paul Bentley has asked, do you think the Bosman rule has been good or bad for the sustainability of football? It seems like clubs can miss out on potential transfer fee revenue when a player's contract is running out. This then inflates player wages, so the money goes to the player rather than the selling clubs. Are there any alternatives? For example, something similar to a sell-on clause where the player could be sold for a percentage of the original transfer fee when the contract runs out.
Right, okay. So let's go back to the original issue. This was a Belgian footballer called Jean-Marc Bosman. He was playing in the Belgian league. He was what you might call a journeyman pro. And his contract was due for renewal. He wanted to move elsewhere. And prior to the court ruling, the football club was allowed to retain the registration of the player. So what his employer did, it says, we're not going to allow you to go elsewhere, and we're going to give you a pay cut. Now, this seemed intuitively unfair, so he appointed a lawyer, and it went through the European Court, and now we have what is known as the Bosman ruling. And the way that the Bosman ruling works is that when you sign a contract of employment along with your registration deal, that is for a fixed period of time. There's nothing to stop you from extending it. But at the end of that period of time, you are in effect a free employee. You are entitled to find alternate employment elsewhere. And therefore, we have had a rise in the number of players who have said, well, I've signed a 3 or 4 or 5 year contract. I'm going to sit out that contract. And then at the end of it, I'm going to move elsewhere. And instead of the football club getting a transfer fee, the football player gets the benefit of being able to get effectively a signing on fee. And we've seen Ibrahimovic do this. We've seen Pogba do this, and many others. So it benefits the football player. As far as Paul's concern is, could we have something similar to a sell-on clause? You could, but then I think we would have to get approval from not just UEFA, but also the relevant courts operating both in the EU and the UK and potentially elsewhere. We'd have to see what the reaction of FIFA would be. So it would be very complicated. One of the issues that I have is that we end up talking about football players as if they are commodities. And this is something which has always left me feeling very uneasy. Ultimately, we are dealing with young people, both men and women, as far as their professional careers are concerned. And if I wanted to move elsewhere, then I could do so by just giving the requisite amount of notice as far as my job was concerned. And yes, I might be put on gardening leave depending upon the nature of the job, but I still have to be paid for that period of gardening leave. So we do treat footballers in a unique manner. And therefore, I think there is a case for saying that they do get a fair amount of protection from the Bosman ruling, as do the clubs themselves, because otherwise, how do you get rid of a member of staff? Because you normally have to make them redundant. Football clubs do not make players redundant, and therefore they don't have to pay redundancy pay. So it does work both ways.
You're talking about Liverpool University here, Kieran. I'm not sure producer Guy, even with his house of gold, can afford to put you on gardening leave on this pod, Kieran, while he tries to lure Swiss Ramble to take over from you in your retirement. Well, you know more silver-tongued lawyers than Guy does, so I think you'd win any argument there. Our last question, Kieran, comes from John Vince. I'm not going to lie, Kieran, this question caused me some slight embarrassment this morning at the pub. John Vince is a Palace fan, and talking of players as commodities, John Vince has this question. He says, with Ronaldo reported as being on £177 million a year at Al Nassr, what would Pele's £1.4 million a year contract, $1 million a year contract, I beg your pardon, at New York Cosmos equate to today? And then John says, P.S. Kevin, you said I'm the bloke who stands in the corner of the Pawsons, but I've only been twice to the Pawsons when you've been there, once when you were with Julian Chenery. I'd like to know who my doppelganger is. Well, I can report that John Vince wasn't at the Pawsons today. Because when I got to the Pawsons, I was having a drink with Julian Chenery in the 90-degree heat, and I thought, that's John Vince in the corner. I shall go and apologise to him, and we can have a little chuckle about me mistaking him for somebody else. And it wasn't John Vince. It was somebody who didn't know who I was and hadn't heard of the pod, and it all got very, very, very embarrassing until I had to do one of my looks towards Gaz, who rescued me. I begin to think John Vince might be gaslighting me, but it definitely, he says it wasn't him, and several other people, including the woman who he was with, who was his wife, said it wasn't John Vince. So I took her word for it, essentially. Until eventually the woman who was his wife said, I think you should probably keep digging now. Not John Vince, started to run out of humour about me thinking he was John Vince and accused her. So eventually. I told Ali that story when I got home. She was waiting to go out on tour and she thought it was hilarious. Right? She's literally looking at her watch saying, when's this story that was shit in the first place ever going to stop? Anyway, the question... Pele against Ronaldo. What would Pele's $1.4 million? And I noticed, Kieran, more and more interestingly, people are asking you to equate these figures. So people, certainly of our generation, can understand what £1 million meant when Trevor Francis went for it, but they kind of can't get their head around what these staggering figures are now.
Yes, and for anybody watching the show on video, by the way, I have a fly in my office which keeps walking over the camera, so if that's why my face suddenly disappears with a big blurry splodge.
Sorry, Kieran, is there an option to watch this show on video?
I don't know. But producer Guy, he's always 3 steps ahead of us when it comes to the technology.
When it comes to getting to the bank, yeah, certainly. I think I'd be slightly against people being able to see what we see us as well, Kieran. But I mean, I can see the fly. Obviously, it's very funny seeing you distracted by a large splodge-like object. Yes, carry on. Sorry. Hello, Smudge.
Right. Are you sure that John Vince doesn't have a doppelganger? Because wasn't it Colo Torre that claimed to be a professional sportsman, and there's another Premier League player who claimed to be a milkman.
Oh.
He was having a relationship with a young lady who wasn't his wife.
Ooh.
And he managed to convince her that he was a milkman, and that's why he kept turning up at strange times. But he was doing things of a nefarious nature, or carnival relations, as my grandmother used to say. She was whenever she get very angry reading the Daily Mirror. Those two have been having carnival relations. I bet she'd go before.
Well, before we've done it on swings, we've done it on roundabouts, Kieran. So, I'm just intrigued by the fact that this chap thought she'd be more impressed by having an affair with a milkman than a Premier League footballer.
That's right. Yes, very, very true. And then when he started giving her very expensive gifts, he said, "Yeah, I'm a professional tennis player as well." What? So when you're in a hole, just stop digging.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't do carnival relations.
No. If it gets you free yogurt, Kieran, then why not?
Well, yes, that's a separate tale. Right. So thank you very much, John, for this question, because it allowed me to go to spreadsheet heaven. Pele was playing for the New York Cosmos in around about 1975-76. So I've done 2 calculations here. First of all, based on wage inflation between 1975 and 2023. And wage inflation, Pele would be on $15.2 million. A decent sum of money, but, we've got players in the Premier League on more than that. So what I've done is I've used football inflation, and the way that I calculate football inflation is that I look at the ability of the football club to pay money out from the money that it's got coming in. So I went into Companies House and I managed to find a few of the bigger clubs, the likes of Liverpool and Manchester United and so on. So I went into their accounts in 1975 and 1976, compared them to today, and on the basis of those calculations, Pele's salary in 2023 would be $817,699,114
Wow.
a year. Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Repeat that figure for me, Kieran, please, would you?
$817,699,114
Wow.
would be the equivalent, assuming that the revenue of the New York Cosmos has grown as quickly as it has in the Premier League is concerned, which is an awful lot of money. We'll have to see how much the Saudi Pro League is willing to offer some players in the next week or two. Whether it will come anything close to that.
Yeah, there's some confusion about this. Is their transfer window still open?
Yes, it is. It's. I think it's open until about the 7th or the 8th of September. So they've got a week of mischief making and ne'er-do-welling, should they so desire to go down that route, and attracting players from the Premier League.
Oh, right, that's interesting.
And elsewhere.
But there was some discussion on this today as to whether, and I didn't know the answers, as to whether the fact that our transfer window was closed, some people seem to think that meant that you couldn't buy people from the Premier League, but you still.
The Premier League cannot buy players.
Okay, right.
But the Saudi Pro League can.
So Liverpool fans can't quite sleep easily in their bed for a few days yet.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod, that would be very kind of you. And you can do so by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. And if you'd like to pre-order our new book, Unfit and Improper Persons, or one of our other books, or get yourself a Price of Football t-shirt, you can go to our New Look website at priceoffootball.com. We will be back with our news pod on Thursday. And in the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, thank you, everybody at Patreon, and those of you that tuned in for our first Discord. It was great to chat to you on that as well. There are many ways of supporting the show, and we are looking forward to meeting some of you when the autumn tour is crystallised. But we've certainly got dates as far as Salford Lowry and Blackpool are concerned, with others to follow. There's another way that you can support the show, and that's to give us a review. And apparently, according to Producer Guy, it helps us as far as algorithms and metrics and convincing the guests that we are legitimate and not just a pair of chancers from South London. So, by all accounts, it doesn't matter what you say. You could even say you would rather have the show presented by Mike Dean, who's perhaps not the coolest person on the planet, and Chrissy Hind, who I think is the coolest person on the planet.
Oh, she wasn't. She was fantastic at Glastonbury, wasn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's bin Mike Dean and let's just have Chrissy Hind doing it, because we just get. In fact, Chrissy Hind's probably got issues with Mike Dean as well, I imagine, over various VAR decisions that she's done to annoy. And VAR's working really well, isn't it? I wonder how much that costs Chrissy Hind. See, that's how to get a man of a certain age just drifting off to the inevitable conclusion. No, I think that sounded worse than it was. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.